Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, barely 19, stood on the precipice of an inner abyss so profound and disorienting that later biographers would speak of it as his first Faustian crisis. This was a period when the body, the mind, and the imagination converged in a storm that threatened to engulf him, leaving him suspended between reality and vision, between life and the intangible realms his fevered mind conjured. His body had been weakened by a severe hemorrhage, compounded by respiratory infections that were treated only with rudimentary medical care. Confined to his parents' home in Frankfurt, immobilized for months, Goethe experienced an isolation that intensified both his physical suffering and his psychic sensitivity. The combination of weakness, opiates prescribed to relieve pain, and the monotony of seclusion created conditions in which the boundary between waking and dreaming, the material and the symbolic, dissolved almost entirely. Each shadow on the poorly lit walls became an actor in a private theater of the imagination. Every flicker of candlelight suggested the unfolding of alchemical dramas, mysterious sigils, pentagrams, spirals, and hieroglyphic-like shapes, some drawn from forbidden 17th-century treatises he had encountered in his obsessive reading. This period was not a simple bout of illness. It was a liminal space in which Goethe confronted both his mortality and the capacity of the human mind to generate worlds from the depths of suffering. Biographers describe how he would awaken, often in terror, convinced that the objects around him, mirrors, window panes, the thin light of the morning sky, were conveying secret messages. The ordinary became extraordinary, the familiar became alien. He felt himself pierced by contradictory forces, an almost irresistible attraction to the occult, to the promise of transformation and knowledge beyond ordinary comprehension, and, at the same time, a visceral fear that he might be losing touch with the common reality that binds human life. These forces were not abstract, they manifested in fevered dreams, hallucinations, and compulsive attempts at representation through drawing. By day, Goethe tried to render these visions into symbols and diagrams, creating mystical trees of being, alchemical charts, and sigil-like sketches, blending elements of Paracelsian philosophy, the writings of German alchemists, and the cryptic hermetic treatises he had discovered during his studies in Leipzig. Each line, each spiral, was both an attempt to capture meaning and a desperate effort to impose order upon a mind in tumult. The crisis extended far beyond the mystical or the symbolic, it was also profoundly existential. Convalescence forced Goethe to abandon temporarily his studies, leaving him suspended between the security of the past and the uncertainty of the future. In this suspended state, the notion of the double, a shadow self, a dark counterpart that might dominate or destroy, became a recurring presence. He later reflected that man's being opens in two at the edge of illness, a remark scholars interpret as an acknowledgement of the duality he experienced, the interplay between conscious and unconscious, reason and imagination, life and the abyss of the psyche. This period marked a confrontation not merely with illness, but with the very limits of human understanding, a confrontation that would leave traces in his later work as the persistent tension between aspiration and limitation, knowledge and danger, desire and fear. At the same time, Goethe's obsessive engagement with alchemical manuscripts encouraged him to perceive symbolic meaning in the most elemental phenomena. Metals, in their base forms, became metaphors for the soul. The promise of transmutation represented the possibility of spiritual refinement, of inner transformation. The idea of a pact with a higher power, whether divine, infernal, or indeterminate, emerged as an intimate, almost personal question, fraught with peril. Goethe's letters and notes reveal a constant undercurrent of anxiety, a fear that the mind might be irreversibly altered, that the exploration of symbolic realms could dissolve the self. Yet it was precisely this fear, mingled with fascination, that would forge the psychological intensity of his later creative output. From this crucible arose the seeds of what would ultimately become Faust. Not in narrative form yet, but in psychic architecture, the confrontation with human limitation, the allure and danger of absolute knowledge, the abyss that threatens to consume the seeker, and the relentless drive to find meaning amid chaos. Goethe's encounter with these forces was not passive, it was active, demanding, and exhausting. Every waking hour, every fevered night, was a negotiation with inner forces that were simultaneously seductive and terrifying. He experimented with sketches and diagrams, searching for order within the chaos, attempting to decode the language of shadows, light, and symbols, and, in doing so, he was cultivating a profound sensitivity to the inner mechanics of the human soul. As his physical health gradually returned, Goethe emerged from this period transformed. He had gained not only extraordinary intellectual energy but also an abiding recognition that the human soul is perpetually engaged in a tension between forces that are simultaneously creative and destructive. The experience solidified his conviction that true intellectual and emotional maturation can only occur after one has stared into the depths of the psyche and survived the encounter. In subsequent years, the motifs of his first Faustian crisis, alchemy, the double, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, the confrontation with a force beyond comprehension, recurred repeatedly, crystallizing in the symbolic and psychological structure of his later works. The influence of this period extended far beyond thematic inspiration. It shaped Goethe's understanding of the relationship between science, art, and spirituality. He approached nature with empirical observation, yet remained attuned to its symbolic resonance. He pursued knowledge rigorously while acknowledging the fragility and unpredictability of the human mind. His work became a synthesis of clarity and mystery, rationality and imagination, precision and poetic vision. The febrile visions, the symbolic constructions, the oscillation between terror and fascination, all of these became instruments through which he explored the boundaries of experience and consciousness. This early crisis was a formative lens through which Goethe would understand human creativity, human ambition, and human limitation. It was a confrontation with mortality, with the intensity of interior life, and with the possibility that the mind itself could become both the instrument and the adversary of the self. In this encounter with the abyss, Goethe discovered not only the depths of personal insight but also the profound potential for artistic creation. His genius lay in the ability to transform the intensity of experience into enduring structures of thought and imagination, in which the pursuit of knowledge and the experience of the soul's fragility are inseparably entwined. Thus, Goethe's first Faustian crisis was more than an adolescent brush with illness or an early flirtation with the mystical. It was the foundational encounter with the human condition in its most extreme, most illuminating form. From it emerged a vision of existence as a perpetual interplay of forces, a recognition that the pursuit of understanding inevitably carries risk, and an artistic and intellectual methodology capable of embracing both empirical observation and symbolic insight. The months of delirium and isolation forged the architecture of a mind that would navigate the liminal spaces between reality and imagination with unprecedented depth and sophistication, laying the groundwork for a literary legacy that continues to illuminate the human psyche with the intensity and complexity first glimpsed on the shadowed walls of a young Goethe's room.